Hey there, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to work on the Teddy Tool Tote. I'm really excited about this bag. I've wanted to do an organizer style bag for a while, and this one is exactly what I have been looking for. I don't know about you, but as things are starting to open up again, I'm starting to go to some retreats and sewing weekends with friends, and I just need a place to put all of my stuff. So for me, I'm using this for my sewing notions, but you can definitely use it for lots of other hobbies. So on the outside, you have some pockets here, as well as on the opposite side. Pretty much everything that's on one side is on the opposite side in this bag. So we've got some pockets outside, great to put things that you need to grab quickly, like your scissors and rotary cutter. You could even put your phone in there if you wanted to, depending on how you need to organize your goodies. You have your handles here. It's got this awesome double zippered flap, which opens up really wide. So you have a compartment down here where you can put some of your larger items. I put my pressing clappers, sometimes a project in here. You can even put an iron if you need to. And then inside you have lots of pockets. These are pleated, so they're great. They're not too flat, so they hold, bigger items. Some rotary cutters, pins. Sometimes you get items like this that are a little bit bigger and, larger. So you can put those in there, and then it zips right up. It has a tab on both sides, making it easy. You have something to hold on to when you're zipping. It's of course a little bit easier when there's stuff inside of it. It's kind of light right now. So you zip that right up. I don't have any kind of closure down on the end here. If you wanted to add a magnetic snap, you absolutely could, but I did not find it necessary. One of the fun things that I love about this bag is that there is no hardware. So the only thing that you need is your fabric, whatever you want to do for your lining fabric. I used Essex linen on the inside in 2 different colors. I used a contrast for the pockets. And then I also used a canvas for the outside. I love doing a bag like this in canvas. I think it gives it a really great structure. And then I just have my 2 zippers. I am using the faux metal zippers that I sell on my website. You do want to get a number 5 purse zipper, and what that means is the number 5 has to do with the size of the teeth, and a purse zipper means that the tape is a little bit wider. If you do this with a narrow zipper, it's going to adjust the size up here, so you might have to make some adjustments. And that's it. So just some interfacing fabric and 2 zippers, no hardware, nothing fancy, and you can make this on your domestic. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of our supplies. So I've already gone ahead and done all of my cutting and fusing, so let's go through our pieces. I am using a canvas for today, and I'm using a waterproof canvas inside, so we'll talk about that when we get to the lining. This is a directional print, and this bag is totally fine to do a directional print with. I'm going to show you a couple of spots where you might want to make some alterations. For me, I just went along with it, and I didn't really do anything special. So I have my 2 pieces right here. For my outside, these are my A pieces. These have interfacing, so these are out of canvas. This is going to be for the main part of the bag where the handles and the outside pockets will sit. I've also got here my B pieces. These are going to be for those 2 outside pockets. Those are also interfaced. So regardless of what you use on the outside, unless you're using something super, super heavy, which I don't think that you would want to for this bag, this is a nice medium weight canvas. Everything on the outside is going to get interfaced. So these are my B pockets. I also have here my C. Now this is for the center, for the flap where the zippers go. And one thing I just wanted to point out here, when this is in the bag, and this will make a little bit more sense later, we have these 2 pieces on either side. So we have our A's and this in the center. I went in the same direction as my other pieces are cut, so I will technically have my, the people kind of standing upright and coming in, and this one going this way. To me, it looked right, and it worked with my fabric requirements that I have. If you want to turn this and you want your people going the other way, or the direction of your fabric going horizontal instead of vertical, you are going to want to purchase some extra fabric so you can fussy cut that. So that is my C piece. Again, when we get to that part, I'll show you, and that might make a little bit more sense. We have D here. Now D is for the opposite end. So when you look at the bag, there is a zippered flap, and then this is what I call the bag flap end, because it's kind of both. It is the end of the bag, but it's also a small flap itself. So these 2 are going to go next to each other like that. That's why I cut those in that direction. I have my handles and my tabs. So I have these already folded. We'll go over that in the next step. I have my E handles as well as my F tabs. So E has interfacing F does not. F is the only piece of outside that's not going to have interfacing. And I'll show you how to fold those handles. Your strips are obviously going to be flatter at this point. I've just gone ahead and done some of the work. Let's take a look at the lining pieces. So for my lining, I have my G's. Okay, so these are, again, out of waterproof canvas. Now, because I'm using waterproof canvas, I have chosen not to interface. Waterproof canvas, for two reasons, you don't need to interface. Number one, it is a rubberized backing. So if you put heat on this side, you are going to melt it and possibly ruin your iron. We don't want to do that. Also, the waterproof canvas has a really great weight to it. It does not need interfacing. So in the bag I showed you before, I had used an Essex linen, which is obviously a lot lighter. It's a light, more of a quilter's cotton weight. So I interface those. For this lining, I am not interfacing. So these are my G's. I also have here my H's. These are going to be for the inside pockets. So again, no interfacing. Now, one thing to note, if you are using quilter's cotton or a linen for your lining, for these pieces, it does not have you interface them in the pattern. And the reason is, let me grab the finished bag. I did interface these and they're fine, but on a domestic, they were a little bit hard to sew through down at the bottom where you're pleating. And this, again, we'll get to that step. If you want to interface your pockets, if you're using cotton and you want to interface them, I would suggest that you cut your interfacing short on each of these long sides. That's going to be the bottom edge. I would cut it about a 1/2 inch short just to make that a little bit easier. I also found that in the finishing steps, when we're turning everything and doing our corners, that because these are kind of stiff, it made it a little bit more challenging. It's totally fine to skip the interfacing. You can even use a lighter interfacing if you prefer. It's totally up to you. I would say the next time I make one in cotton, I will probably just completely skip the interfacing, just like I have in the pattern. So I just wanted to let you know, sometimes I write things in a pattern for a reason because I tested it out myself and I didn't love it. So for the waterproof canvas, does not need any interfacing. And then I have here, I don't remember the letters, sorry, I and J. I'm a little off today. I and J, which these are going to be underneath that flap. So this is the back part of the zippered flap, and this is the bottom part of the bag end flap. So those are all the pieces that I need. I also have my 2 zippers. So you're just going to need 2 18-inch zippers. I used a yard pack. And so it already comes with the pulls. These are ready to go. Other than that, I don't need any hardware, which is the awesome part. I'm sure at home you already have enough fabric interfacing and zippers to make this. You don't even have to go out and get anything extra. So let's look at some of the other tools I'm going to be using today. So let's take a look at some of the other necessities that you're going to need for today. I, of course, have my cutting mat, my ruler, and my rotary cutter. That's how I did all of my cutting. Got all of my pieces ready. I'll also need this later for my corners and any trimming I need to do. Scissors, of course, always important to have around. There's no hardware or anything special on this bag, but I always like to have some of my Kai scissors around for any trimming, any threads, anything like that that I need. A seam ripper because I'm not, I know that I'm going to need it at some point, don't we always? That's how you know you're a true bag maker. I have some marking tools, and these are important. In the video, you may see me using a permanent pen. The reason is I wanted to show up on video, but I would highly caution you from doing that for this bag. Any of the markings that we need to make are going to be for placement. That will be a lot in the lining part in a little bit. So you definitely want something light, like a chalk pencil or a regular pencil or something erasable. Even a Frixion pen is fine. Anything that you have that's not going to be permanent, because we need to draw some placements and some lines that you're going to sew on. So if you can sew over it and hide it, it's perfect. You don't want to use anything that's going to be permanent. So ignore the fact that I use a pen later. This is what I used when I actually made some of the samples. Pins, of course, and clips, always need those for bag making, and my 4-in-1 tool. And this is really important for that zippered flap because you're going to end up with a very long piece with a curve at the end. And when you're turning it, it can be really hard to get your hand in there to smooth that out. This makes a huge difference. So if you have any kind of point turner, you're going to want that for this bag. So now that we have all of our supplies and all of our cutting is done, let's jump right into step 2. Step 1 was our fusing, so let's talk about handles. For step 2, we're going to make our handles. So I've already gone ahead and folded these. I have not done my top stitching yet. So you have 2 long strips, these are your E's, and you have 2 small strips, these are your F's. So the E's are fully interfaced. You can see these are a little bit stiffer. The F's for the tabs, those don't have any interfacing. So what you're going to do is fold all of these the same way and top stitch them the same way. So that's why I like to go to the iron, get it all done, and then take it right to my sewing machine and just sit. I don't know about you, but I find handles are really relaxing because I just keep doing the same thing over and over and I can just sit and sew. So what you're going to do to fold your handles, just like you've done if you've made any of my other bags, you have your interface side right here. You're going to fold your piece down the middle and create a nice crease with your iron. You're going to fold each of your edges in towards that center and then fold it one more time so you get a beautiful handle that only has raw edges down on the bottom here, and those are going to be hidden later. You can leave your handles a little bit longer if you would like, if you want to trim them down afterwards. Sometimes I know you can get little, some little threads and bird nests at the end. Also, if you want to make your handles longer because you want them longer on your bag, that is totally fine. I found that the length I selected was right for me, but you have a full width of fabric, so you can kind of adjust that if you want. As far as your tabs are concerned, you're going to fold them the same exact way, top stitch them the same way. Again, they have raw edges just down here. These do not have any interfacing. So I'm going to head over to the machine and do my top stitching. Because I like to do a double top stitching, I'm going to use 2 feet. I like to use my blind hem foot, which is that foot that I talk about all the time. It has the center guide, so I move my needle all the way to the left, and I just run that right along the edge, and I get a nice 1/8 of an inch. Then when I'm done, I'm going to do a 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to do it on both sides on all 4 pieces, and then I'll be right back. I've completed the top stitching on my 2 handles as well as my tabs. I had left my handles a little bit longer, so I went ahead and trimmed those. Again, I did a double top stitching. That's what I do on the majority of my handles. So I do an 1/8 of an inch and a 1/4 of an inch from each side. That's just what I like to do. When I top stitch, I always increase my stitch length to about 3.5. And I used my blind hem foot for the 1/8 inch and my 1/4 inch foot for the 1/4 inch. So these are all set. I'm going to go ahead and push those aside and grab my B pieces. So I have 2 of these. These are going to be for the outside pocket. They are interfaced. And remember, your pocket is longer than it is high. So if you're using a directional fabric like I am, just keep that in mind when you do your cutting. So what you're going to do for both of these is you're going to fold them in half, fabric sides together, just like this. I've already gone ahead and clipped this one. You're going to add a couple of clips or pins and take this to the machine using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to sew your short ends as well as a few inches on the bottom. You want to leave an opening down here for turning. You do not have to worry about closing that right now. We'll do that in a later step. So I'm going to go ahead and get both of these sewn, and then I'll show you how I like to clip my corners before I turn it right side out. I stitched both of my pockets. I stitched the short ends as well as a few inches on the bottom, leaving this bottom edge open. Before turning, I trimmed my corners, so I just like to take a little bit out of the corner on each side. I find that it makes my corners a lot smoother when I turn it. What I did on this one, I'm not sure if you can see that or not, right along here, is I did a little basting stitch. So I moved my stitch length up as high as it would go, which for me is about 5.0. And I just basted that edge, and what that does is it perforates it and makes it a lot easier to fold. So after I turned it right side out, I gave it a good press. You can see I have really nice corners here. I top stitch right along this top edge, that's the folded edge, and I still have this bottom open right here. I'm not going to do anything with that right now, but eventually I'm going to need to turn those edges under. And by doing this little basting stitch that perforates it, it makes it turn under a lot easier and it looks a lot straighter. Totally optional. It's not something I talked about in the pattern, but I just wanted to show you how that looks. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board, get this one pressed and top stitch, and both of my pockets will be done. So for step 5, you're going to need both of your A pieces, these are your outside pieces, and both of your handles. I have set the other 2 pieces aside. I'm just going to demonstrate on this A and this handle. So in the pattern, it's going to give you some measurements. And if you want to use your mat and your ruler, you can do that. I've already gone ahead and made some marks. I'm not sure if they'll show up for you on camera, but I've gone ahead and followed the pattern. I made a mark from the bottom up. That's where I'm going to measure for the base of my handle. I've also found the center at the top and bottom. I like to mark both the top and the bottom because I find that it helps me keep my handle straighter. I've also gone ahead and made some little marks here as well as here so that I know where to place my handle. So first things first, I'm going to take the bottom edge of my handle, and this is a raw edge, but it will get covered by the pocket in a little, the next step. I'm going to put the bottom right there and line it up in these marks that I've made. And I'm just going to take a few clips and just like that, clip the top. Now you can take a pin if you want and put a pin through here, but rather than do that, since the canvas is kind of thick, I just have a little extra mark down here. So when I'm sewing, I can just kind of, line that up and then do my stitching. I don't find that I need to have that extra pin. I'm gonna grab a couple more clips here. When you put your handle on the other side, just make sure that it's not twisted. You don't want to get a twist in your handle. I'm gonna again line up the bottom and line up on my marks. There we go. And add a couple of clips. Just like that. So now my handle is evenly spaced and it's centered. The bottom down here is going to get covered by the pocket, and that's at the marks that I made. So I'm just about ready to sew. The last thing that you're going to need to do is make some marks as per the pattern on the handle here. We want to measure down from the top for these marks. You don't want to sew your handle all the way to the top. If you do that, the assembly part will be, well, it won't happen. You won't be able to do that. So you don't want your handle sewn all the way to the top, just like on any other bag. So what I've done is I've already gone ahead and made some light marks here. I'm going to do the same thing with my other two pieces. And then I'm going to take these to the sewing machine. I'm going to start down here. I'm going to follow my 1/8 inch stitch line that I've already done. I'm going to come all the way up, reinforce a few times across here. I sew about 2 to 3 times. That can be a stress point, so you really want to reinforce that. And then I'm going to come back down. If you want to sew across the bottom here, you absolutely can. If you don't, that's okay. That's going to get covered. So what I'll probably do is just stitch once across here. So again, I'm going to follow my 1/8 inch up, stitch back and forth a few times, come back down, do the same thing here, across, up, a few times across, and back down. Once that's ready and my other one is ready, I can add my pockets. I completed step 4. I have my handles sewn onto both of my A pieces. So I've just grabbed one again here. And the next part for step 5 is going to be adding our pockets. So these are the pockets that we just finished. There's still an opening in the bottom. So the first thing that I'm going to do is fold those edges under. And again, I'm not sewing it right now. I'm going to sew it when I add it onto this piece, but I just want to get it prepped. So you can use pins or clips. This is the one that I had basted, so my edges are folding down nice and neat. If you want to take this to your iron and press it, you can do that. Whatever is going to make this easier for you, go right ahead and just keep doing this. I'm all thumbs today. Can't grab a clip to save my life. All right, one more, and I should be ready to go. All right, so my pocket is all set. I tucked my edges under. Again, in the pattern, it's going to give you some measurements, and you can use your mat and ruler to do that. I've already gone ahead and made some marks for myself. So I measured again from the bottom. So the bottom edge of my pocket is going to be lower than the handle. That's how that's going to be hidden. This will actually be kind of inside of the pocket. I've also measured out on the sides. And I have my center marks still here, and I can also find the center on my pocket. I just really want to make sure that this is lined up as best as I can. So a couple of extra precautions, that's fine. So I have my center. I've got my bottom marks here, and it looks like everything is lined up perfectly. So again, because I have a directional fabric, I'm making sure that everything is going in the same direction. I am going to add a few pins here. So if you ever need to add pins to something thick like this, rather than taking your pin and kind of scooping it, which is going to bend your pin, this is what I like to do. I just put that in like so, take my fabric and fold the fabric up and push the pin through. So I can do that over there. And I've got my marks, so I really don't need the pins, but I'm just going to add them anyway. So again, push your pin through, fold your fabric, and then push the pin through the other side. Then you won't bend your pin. So now that I have that in place, I'm going to do the same with the other A and the other B pocket. I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and stitch 1/8 of an inch down the side, across the bottom, which will be sewing it in place and closing this opening, and back up to the top. Then I'm going to make some marks right here on the inside edge of my handle, and that's going to be to divide this into 3 pockets. Now, this is your bag. If you don't want to do it that way and you want to sew it in the center and have 2 pockets outside, you can totally do that. Divide it however it makes the most sense for you and your project. I like to have the 3 pockets on the outside. I find that they're a good size for my scissors and my rotary cutter, things that I want to access quickly. So I'm just going to use my chalk pencil and make a light line right here and right here. I'm going to sew those, and whenever I sew pockets like that in the center, what I like to do is start at the bottom. I sew up, turn, and come back down. Up, turn, and come back down. Makes it a lot stronger. You can do the same thing on the outside if you want, or you could even just sew it twice. So I'm going to get my other one prepared, take these to the machine, and get them all set. I completed step 5. My pockets are sewn down on both of my outside pieces. So the handles end about right here, but you can't see them now that the pockets are complete. I sewed twice around and also on my center parts where I divided it. So now I have 3 pockets here. My handles are sewn in and the opening on the bottom is closed. So now I'm ready to move on to step 6 and start preparing my zippered flap. For step 6, we're going to make the center zippered flap right here. So before we get started, I just wanted to show you, as we had talked about earlier with directional fabric, if there's something that you want to make a change to when you're doing your cutting, this would be what I was referring to. So I have my flap right here, and that's how it's going to look in the bag. So I have my direction going up and down, and my pieces right here, which will be on the outside, are going in the same direction. So essentially I have these characters right side up over here, and I will have these characters right side up over here, and I have this one going this way. So it will kind of be following the same direction, but then on this side it will be in the opposite direction, if that makes sense. It's going to kind of look like that. If that's not something that you want, and you also have a directional fabric and you want to try it a little bit differently, you can turn your piece of fabric and cut it so it's going in this direction, but you will need some extra fabric. You'll need to get about a 1/2 yard or so extra just to make sure that you have that. Maybe you already have that in your stash or you're able to make that work. I just wanted to kind of point that out for you. For today, I'm going with this. I have not done this bag in a directional fabric yet, so I'm kind of learning as I go, but I am fine with it being kind of right side up this way and this one not being in the same direction. So I hope that makes sense, and if it doesn't, when the bag is done, we'll see how it looks, but just so that you know how that's going to go. So let me move this out of the way. So I have my C, which is my outside piece. I also have I, which is my lining piece. This is my waterproof canvas, so this doesn't have interfacing. If you're using cotton, yours would be interfaced. I've grabbed my template, and I also have my zippers. So let's talk about the zippers first. You're going to need 2 of them. And I have right here, I've already put my pole on. I haven't done anything on the ends. But what we're going to do before we can add this to these pieces is to curve the ends. And if you've done any of my recessed zippers, you are probably familiar with this. So I'm just taking this end and curving it away from the zipper teeth like so, adding a pin like this. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I try to keep it as even as I can, but perfection is completely overrated for this. Don't stress about it. Okay, so if they're not totally perfect or they're not exactly the same, it's totally fine. Don't worry. I'm going to put a pin like that. Take this to the sewing machine and put a few stitches just to hold those in place, and then it will look like this. So I've already sewn this one. And then the other thing we're going to do is at the sewing machine is you want to sew across the end here. I like to increase my stitch length as high as it will go. So again, for me, that's about a 5. And I just go back and forth a few times just to really secure that, because for this step and a future step, I like to sew with my zipper open. So if I've secured the end here and stitched, I don't have to worry about losing my pull. So I'll finish those up in just a second. For these two pieces right here, I do need to use my template and cut this curve from one end of each. So there is going to be a flat end and then there's going to be the curved end. And if you want to put those together and use your ruler and your rotary cutter, or excuse me, your mat, you can do that. Or if you want to just clip this and you can cut with scissors and mark, whatever you find easier, really does not make a difference. Zippers are all set and both of my pieces are trimmed on one end. So I have a straight end and I have a curved end. So now what I'm going to do is use some clips, or you can use pins, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to start on the outside piece. So I want to line up my zippers on here and baste them in place before I add my lining piece. So the first thing that I'm going to do is turn my zipper just like this. So it's right side down on this edge. Now, I don't care about this end. I did go ahead and stitch so I wouldn't lose my pulls, so that if I want to open it up for sewing, I'm good. But I don't want to line this up. I want to slide this down and line up this curved edge so it's roughly 1/4 of an inch from that end. Doesn't have to be perfect. I don't measure it, but I don't want this all the way up to the curve. So I'm just going to do it just like this and add a few clips all the way down, clip or pin. This is just so that I can get it to the sewing machine and baste. So I have the first zipper in. Now I'm going to take the second zipper, do the same thing. So it's right side down. Turn this, put my curve over the edge and down roughly 1/4 of an inch from that top curve, and add some clips. Whenever I do a zipper like this, I do like to baste it, because if I try to put the lining on first and do my seam allowance, I find that something moves and it's typically the zipper, and I don't want that to be crooked. I want to keep it as straight as I can. So I just find it a little bit easier this way. So I'm going to take this to my machine and baste about 1/8 of an inch down each of those edges just to hold that in place. When I'm done, I'll be ready to add my lining piece. So I'll take my lining piece and put that right side down, and I will sew that. First I'm going to baste and then I'll come back. My zippers are basted in place. So again, my zipper edge is right along the edge of the fabric here. It did shift a little bit right there. I'll fix that. That's okay. And my curve is down from the curved edge of the fabric. So it's about 1/4 of an inch or so down. My zipper pulls are still closed for now, but for this next part, I am going to open them. And this is why I like to close the ends of the zipper, so that I don't have to worry about those pulls coming off. So what I'm going to do is just kind of leave these two edges in the middle. I'm still not working with those, but I don't want them to get sewn in the wrong place. So I'm just going to kind of set those there. I'm going to take my fabric and put it right sides together with the outside. So again, I don't have any interfacing. If you are using cotton, you would be looking at the back of your interfacing. So I'm just going to clip along the curve there. I know that my zipper is in place, so I really don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to add a couple of clips just like that. And now I'm going to use 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to sew all the way down over the curve and back down. I'm going to leave this short end open, so I am not sewing here. That's where I'm going to turn. So I'm going to take this back to my machine, get my sewing done, and then I'll show you how to prepare this before you turn it. I stitched my flap using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and before I turn this out and take it over to the ironing board, what I like to do is first trim off these little zipper ends right here. All right, get rid of those. And in case I forgot to mention, I also made sure to back stitch when I started down here, because I'm going to be turning this right side out. Anytime I have something to turn, I make sure that I back stitch. Now right up here on this curve, to make it a little bit smoother, what I like to do is just take my scissors and just trim this down to about 1/8 of an inch. Doesn't have to be anything perfect, but I just like to take away some of that excess fabric. I find that it's a lot smoother when it's finished. So now I'm going to pull these other ends of the zipper out of the way, and I'm going to turn this. And I'm just going to be real gentle here. Now, because I have waterproof canvas, it can be a little bit stiffer. And if you like, what you can do before you start turning is take it to the ironing board and warm it up. Sometimes when the interfacing is stiff, it doesn't want to turn as easily, but if you warm it up first, it will turn a lot better, which I did not do. So I'm just going to keep turning just like that. And once I can get a hold of that end, I am almost done. There we go. So if I grab the ends of the zipper, I can kind of pull it like this, and you can see my curve is not looking so great. So what I like to do is take my turning tool, my 4-in-1 tool, and I'm going to reach up in here with my hand and just kind of scoot that down a little bit and just run that right along the edge. Give the zipper a tug so you can straighten that out. Get that corner poked out. And give that one little tug there. And now it looks a lot better. And the better I do this, the easier it is at the ironing board. So now I'm going to just smooth that out. Take this over and press, and I can zip my zippers up now. Once I have that pressed, I'm going to top stitch along the 3 edges that I sewed. I'm going to use an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I like that for my top stitching. And once that's done, I will be ready to move on to my next step. I finished up my zippered flap. I gave it a good press and top stitch an 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And I also added my tab. Now in the pattern, it does tell you to add the tab first. More proof that I am actually a human being. I forgot. I don't even know how to follow my own pattern, but it's okay. As long as the flap or the tab is on, that is really all that matters, because we are going to need this. So I just went ahead and added it on afterwards. This does not have to be open anymore. We don't need to get in there for any reason. So adding it on afterwards and sewing through both layers, not a big deal. So I just took one of the tabs, folded it in half, centered it, made sure that it was right in the center of my fabric here, and just stitched it an 1/8 of an inch just once across to baste it in place. So now that this is finished, I am going to go on to the other flap. So for step 7, I need my D, which is from my outside fabric that has interfacing. I also need my J, which is from my lining fabric, and I need my other tab. So let's take a look at this in the finished bag. So here is the finished bag. Here is my zippered flap right here. And on this end right here, this is the bag flap end. Okay, so this is the piece that we're going to make next. So because of the way these pieces go in my bag, I just want to make sure, because I have a directional fabric, that I do this correctly. So when I'm looking in my bag, I want to make sure that these 2 pieces are going the same way, that I don't have one of them upside down. So this side right here would be my finished side, and this would be where I would add my tab. So I'm going to grab my other tab. I'm going to do it right this time, and find my center. So you're going to find the center on one of your longer edges, okay? And if you don't have a directional fabric, it really does not make any difference. So I'm going to find the center there and add a clip. Take this to the machine and baste that again about an 1/8 of an inch. Once I have that sewn in, centered, okay, and again, it's folded in half, I'm going to take my lining piece, my J, put that right sides together, and I'm just going to sew the opposite long edge. So the 2 shorter ends, we're not going to do anything with those. That will get sewn into a seam later. I have one long edge with my tab. The other long edge is going to be finished. So I'm going to sew it, turn it right side out, press, and top stitch. I finished up my bag flap end. So these are ready to go in the bag. I have my tabs on either side. I made sure that my direction is going the right way. So when this is together, it will look like that. So these 2 pieces are done, which means all of the outside pieces are complete. I'm going to set these aside and grab my pockets to start working on the lining. So just like I did earlier for my outside pockets, I'm going to prepare my inside pockets. These are bigger than your outside ones. Again, if you're using cotton fabric, these are probably not interfaced. If you want to add some interfacing, I would short it on both of the long edges. I'm going to move one of these aside since I'm going to do the same thing for both. I'm using waterproof canvas, so I do not have any interfacing, and that's totally fine. These are going to be prepared the same exact way. So remember, your pockets are longer than they are tall. So first thing I'm going to do, just like I did earlier, is fold this in half, right sides together, add a few clips if I need it, and I'm going to sew the short ends as well as the long side, leaving an opening. I'm going to turn it right side out after I clip my corners, give it a good press, and top stitch right along that top folded edge. These are going to look exactly like the pockets we made earlier. I finished up both of my inside pockets. I sewed them the exact same way I sewed the outside. I folded my pieces lengthwise, right sides together, sewed the short ends as well as part of the open bottom edge. I left an opening right along here. Excuse me. Trimmed my corners, turned it right side out, pressed it, and I top stitched right along here, which is the folded top edge. So I've gone ahead and tucked my edges under. This is, again, not sewn. It will be sewn in the next step. I added some clips so that this is all ready to go, and I prepared both of my pockets the same way. So now I'm going to grab my lining pieces, my G, and as per the pattern, I made the marks using those measurements. So again, I would highly suggest that you use something that can be erased or something that is not permanent. I did use a permanent pen because I wanted you to see this on camera. When it comes to these pockets, what you're going to do is you're going to draw a line along the bottom. This is going to be measured up from the bottom. You're also going to have measurements for the outside for those two lines, and you're going to have these three lines in the center. Everything is spaced out evenly. This is going to be for the placement of the pocket. Now on the pocket itself, you're also going to draw some lines. So on the pocket here, on what I would consider my front side, I've gone ahead and also drawn some lines. All of the measurements are going to be in your pattern, so go ahead and follow that to get your measurements for your markings on the lining as well as your pocket. So what you're going to do here is you're going to be lining up your pocket with the bottom edge along this line. You're also going to be taking the edges here to begin, and you're going to line those up on those markings. So I'm lining up this edge and I'm lining up this edge. And as you can see, the pocket is much bigger because we're going to pleat it. So what you're going to do first is you're going to sew those edges. What you are not going to do until everything is sewn down, we're going to do all the vertical first. You're not going to sew the bottom. So let me show you how this looks for the next part. I've already prepared my other pocket. So I have this here. I've got my markings down here and my markings on the pocket. I stitched with an 1/8 inch. I aligned the edges of the pocket with those two outside lines. And now what I'm going to do is take this line right here and this one right here, and I'm going to line that up just like that. I don't pin or add any clips. I find it just as easy to do it at the sewing machine. Once I have that lined up, and I'm trying to keep this as straight as I can along the bottom, I'm going to sew here. I'm going to take this line in the center, and I'm going to take this line right here, just like so. So it's going to look kind of sloppy, and it's not going to lay flat because, again, they're pleated. And what you're going to end up with are kind of these little U-shaped pockets, just like this. Once that's done, I'll show you how to close up and pleat the bottom. So I'm going to head back to the machine and do my vertical stitching first. After lining up the outside edges of my pockets with the two outside lines and stitching those down with an 1/8 inch, I used all of the marks on my pockets and the marks on the lining, aligned those, and I stitched right down. Now, as you can see, because I did use a permanent pen, those red marks are going to be in there forever. Good thing this is my bag. If this was a gift, I would have used something removable, which is why I told you to definitely use something removable, because you don't want to see that later. So what I tried to do is keep everything lined up at that bottom edge as best as I could and sew down those lines. And now I'm going to go ahead and do my pleating. And I don't do anything special. If you want to, like really line these up and have this look a certain way, you can do that. I just kind of squish it and get everything as, as flat as I can, because I'm just going to sew across this using an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm not really going to be too concerned. One thing to note about these pockets is that they are never going to be 100% perfect. They're always going to look a little sloppy, and it's just because of the nature of this style of pocket. So if that bothers you, maybe skip this or do a flat pocket, because this might not work for you if you're really particular about how the inside looks. I wanted some pleated pockets. I knew they weren't going to be perfect, so I was fine with it. So I went ahead and pleated this side so you can see how this looks done. So I kept the bottom edge as straight as I possibly could, trying to align it on that marking that I had made. Is it perfect? No, but it's pretty good. I have my marks done here. Now I've got some pockets, and these are nice size pockets. They can definitely hold, you know, some different things. Here's a couple of rotary cutters. They both fit in there nicely. I can put scissors in there. Sometimes you have some different things that you need to take when you're sewing that are just a little bit bulkier. So these pockets are going to help with that. So I'm going to finish up my other pocket, and then we are going to start assembling. For step 10, we're going to start assembling the bag. One thing I did just want to say about these pockets inside, I am using my domestic machine, and the waterproof canvas is a little bit heavy, but I made it through without any issues. So even where it's pleated and it gets a little bit thick, you can definitely do this on a domestic. One thing that I would suggest is to increase your stitch length. It really helps to go through some of these layers, or you can even use a walking foot. So I'm going to set this aside for now and go ahead and start working on the outside. So just like we did earlier with this flap, I like to baste my pieces and then add my lining pieces. I just find it's much easier and things don't shift on me. So I'm going to start with one of my outsides, my zippered flap, and my bag and flap end. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just fold this handle down, get that out of my way. I can add a pin or a clip if I need to. And I'm going to take my zipper right here, my zippered flap, and put that right side down. You're going to align the edge of the zipper that you haven't sewn yet with the top edge of your fabric, and you're going to line up the end here with the end of the fabric. So the zippered ends are still hanging off the edge. We have not trimmed them yet. Don't worry about that just yet. I'm just going to add a few clips here, because I'm going to take this to the machine and baste it. I just feel a lot more confident when I do it that way. So I've got this other curved end kind of hanging off the edge. My zipper is closed for now, but I will open it when I get over to the machine, and I will definitely open it when I add my lining piece. I like to sew it that way a little bit. I find it a little bit easier. I'm going to take this piece right here. This is the bag flap end. Also put that right side down. I'm going to align this short edge with the top and this longer edge that has my tab with the side here. And one thing that you're going to want to check, don't worry about this part, how much this overlaps. It really doesn't make any difference. But what you want to make sure is that your zipper right here is not touching that. You don't want those to overlap each other. You want to make sure that there is a little bit of a gap right there. So they can be right next to each other, but make sure that they are not overlapping. I'm going to add a clip right there and a clip right there. So I have my pieces ready to go. I'm going to baste 1/8 of an inch right along this edge, and then I'll bring it back and add one of my lining pieces. I'm all basted, 1/8 of an inch. Everything is in place. My zipper is open so that it's hanging off the edge. Again, I just find it easier with the 1/4 inch foot that I have if I don't have my zipper closed. My 1/4 inch foot is kind of wide, and sometimes it will hit the zipper and push everything. So I like to just sew with everything open. So that means that this is kind of loose here. I'm just leaving it sitting just like that. I've got my clips ready, and I'm going to take one of my lining pieces, and this is my top edge. So this is the top of the pockets. That's going to go towards the top. So I'm going to put that right side down and add some clips, and it's going to start to get a little bit bulky, not necessarily where you're sewing, but because you have pockets and handles and things kind of pushing against each other. So I also like to clip down here. Even though I'm not sewing on the ends, I just find that it helps to keep everything kind of stabilized. So I'm just going to clip just like that. I just find it a little bit easier, and I'm going to clip right along here. I don't need too many. My zipper is already basted in place, but I just want to make sure that everything stays put. And I'm going to take this over and sew 1/4 inch right along this edge, just that edge. Make sure to backstitch. And then I'm going to press it and top stitch it, and then I'll add my other pieces. So the first half is sewn in. I sewed it with 1/4 inch seam, made sure that I backstitched, took it over to the ironing board and gave it a good press, and then top stitched. I top stitched 1/8 inch because that's what I had done on everything else so far, so I wanted to keep it even. One thing you want to make sure is that you really press your lining well, especially if you're using something heavy like the waterproof canvas. You don't want that to roll up and get caught in your zipper. You want to make sure that that's opening nice and smoothly. So these are not sewn down at all. They are not top stitched down. The top stitching is just going through the lining as well as the front, the outside. So what I'm going to do on the opposite side with my remaining 2 pieces is repeat that process. I'm going to grab those and I'll show you how to get those all set. So first things first, on this half of the zipper, I'm going to take my other piece right here, my other outside. All right. And again, the top is going to go right here. So this is my top edge. My handle is pushed down. And this second part is going to be a little bit more challenging because, again, you have handles pushing against each other and you're going to be adding on another set of pockets. One other note, the reason that I did my top stitching now and I didn't wait, if you have made the road trip bag, which I did a couple of videos back, you can find that on my channel as well. A lot of these final steps are kind of similar, and you know that if you wait to do your top stitching, that they can both be a little bit challenging because you need to roll your bag in the machine to do the top stitching. That's why I find I do this one, at least I get 1 row of top stitching that's pretty easy, and then my second row will be a little bit more challenging just because I have a lot of bag that I have to kind of wrestle when I'm doing it. So I'm going to, again, line this up. I'm lining up my edges, and I'm lining up right here. So this short end of the bag end flap is going to go here. I'm not sewing here, but I'm going to add a clip on the side just to keep everything where I want it. Bring this piece here, and it appears that these pieces do not fit. And the reason is because everything is pushing against it. They do fit. I have checked my measurements. It's just kind of looking that way because everything is pushing away from it. So one other thing I forgot to mention, this little curved part of the zipper, after I got done stitching, before I turned it right side out and got it ready for top stitching, I did trim that even with the edge of my fabric. You can go ahead and do that after your 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to clip this like so. Go ahead and take this over and baste it like I did the other side. I'm going to pretend for right now I've already basted this. And then I'm going to take my other lining piece, and I'll show you how that looks. So here is lining piece number 2. This is the top edge of the pocket. That's going to go towards the edge I'm sewing. And I'm going to place this right sides together just like so, and then also 1/4 inch. So first I'm going to baste 1/8 inch. Second, I'm going to add this right side down, pockets facing upward, and sew 1/4 inch. Then I will press this and top stitch it. My other sides are sewn in and I did my top stitching. So what I meant earlier by having your top stitching being a little bit more difficult, on the side that was already sewn, I had to kind of roll it up to get it in the machine so that I would have room to top stitch on this side. Not a problem, it works just fine, but if there's a way that you can have one side be easier, why not, right? So I did my first half top stitch and then add my second half and top stitched. So let's take a look at how everything looks so far. Make sure that your bag looks exactly the same, and then we're going to move on to the finishing steps. So your handles are in towards the center, your zippered flap and your bag end flap are together. They are going to overlap a little bit. Sometimes they'll overlap a little bit more and you won't have much of a gap. Sometimes it'll overlap just a little bit. There's no wrong or right answer, so don't stress about how that looks. Both of my outside pockets are open. The opening is facing towards the zipper on both sides. Got some threads here. Let's turn this over. And on the back here, I have my lining pieces. My pockets, the open side of my pockets are facing towards the zipper on both sides. This is all set to go. Everything is good. I have not sewn anything around the outside of the bag. I've only sewn pretty much the center and top stitched. But from here on out, we're done with top stitching. There's no more of that to do. And it's just going to be closing up the bottom and starting to do the corners. Now, something just to note, if you have not done a bag this style before, this is going to be a little bit different in the finishing steps from the typical bags that you've done. Most bags, when you box the corners, they're going to be from front to back on the bottom of the bag. This bag is a boxy pouch style, so similar to the boxy pouch tutorial I have, also very similar to the road trip bag. These corners that we're going to cut and sew in a couple of steps are actually going to be from top to bottom. So you have them in the front and back, in the lining and the outside. So just be prepared if you have not made this style bag. This is going to be a little bit different. Just follow along, watch as many times as you need, and you'll be just fine. So the first thing that we're going to do is take the outside bottom edges and pull those in. So I've got both of my outside pieces and I'm just going to pull those together. So these are my A's. Grab my clips here and I'm going to clip them together. Oops. Oh, that one's gone. I'm very thumbsy. Thumbsy? Is that a word? I don't think it is. I am all thumbs today and I don't have a lot of words left either. I think I need more coffee. So there is my outside, right sides together. I've clipped all the way across the bottom. Now I'm going to take these edges right here for my lining and do the same thing. So my lining is right sides together. The bottom edges of the pockets are down towards the bottom of the lining, and add some clips. The bag is a pretty good size at this point, but we're about to make it a little bit smaller. So this is going to be a little awkward because it's kind of big, but not too hard to do. So what you're going to do on the outside pieces is you're going to sew all the way across the bottom here using a 1/4 inch seam. Make sure you backstitch. And on the lining, you're going to sew just a few inches, probably about 4 or 5 inches on each side. Leave a nice big opening in the center. That's going to be for turning. So I'm going to head over and sew. I sewed all the way across the outside bottom using a 1/4 inch seam. And on the lining, I left a very large opening in the center. Just gonna trim some of my threads here. So now the last thing I'm gonna do before I close up the sides here is to trim these zippers even with the edge of the fabric. So I can go ahead and just cut those right off. I don't need them hanging off the edge anymore. All right, so now what you're going to do is you're going to be pulling these two seams that you just sewed in towards the middle. So earlier you had added your tabs here, so those should be in the middle, but if you want to make an additional mark, you can. And what you're going to do is just on this side right here, I'm going to take my lining and pull that seam right in towards the center. So I'm going to put that right where the tab is, right in the center. And then I'm going to take the outside seam and do the same thing. So I'll be lining up those two seams together in the center of the tab. And I do like to push them in opposite directions just to eliminate a little bit of bulk. And I'm just going to put a clip there. I'm going to add a couple more clips because I'm not going to be sewing this center part right now. And this is just going to help me to get this ready for the next step. So I'll line up these edges. And I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. And don't be afraid to push this down and kind of squish it. You have pockets and handles kind of fighting you and working against you. So it's fine if you need to just kind of do that. So I'm going to take, again, this seam that I just sewed for this lining and put it right in the center of my tab. Add a clip. I push that seam that way. So I'm going to take the outside. There we go. And put that seam going the opposite way. So those are lined up with the tab in the center. And I'll add a few more clips. Okay, so here is the opening that I left in my lining, looking from this side. And from the outside, this is the seam that I just sewed that's completely closed. So now what I'm going to do is work all of these corners, and there's 8, 2 outside and 2 linings on each side. Trim some of these threads. My canvas is fraying a little bit. And I'm just going to smooth these out, but not clip them to the opposite side. So what I mean by that is this outside I clipped by itself. Now I'm going to clip this lining by itself. So I'm just kind of smoothing this edge out, just like this. And these are not clipped together. So I have those separate. So I'm going to do that with all 8 corners, get them all clipped. Okay, so everything is all clipped together. If it helps you, if you want to take a few more clips and kind of push this flat, this is the outside pocket and the handles. If you want to add some clips there to kind of keep that smooth, that's fine. I'm going to do that on these sides as well, just because these want to kind of straighten out and you need them to lay flat to make this part a little bit easier. And the same with the pockets here. You can see they kind of just want to roll towards the center, but what you want is a flat bag. So I'm just going to add some clips because I can always go back in when I'm done and iron. I would rather make my life a little bit easier right now and worry about pressing later. Okay, one more just for fun. Okay, so now that I have this all clipped, again, this is one of the seams that I just sewed with the opening, and the other seam is right here. Those seams started out on the ends, and I brought them in towards the middle, which has given me 8 corners. So I have clipped them together in the center, but I am leaving the outsides over here completely separate. So my outside and my lining on the edges are not clipped together. And what you're going to do, as per the measurement that's in your pattern, is you're going to mark each of these, and you're going to measure from here all the way up as per the pattern and make a little mark. I'm going to do that on all 8 of my corners. So I used the measurement provided in the pattern, and I measured from the corner up into the center of the bag, and I made a mark on all 8 corners. It always happens that my mark is on the wrong side. Like when I take this to the sewing machine, the mark is on this side and I have it turned on the other side. So you can also put a pin there if you want, if it helps you when you're sewing. And I will usually do that when I get to the machine. You'll know that your marks are correct because they should not be touching anything in this center area. You should not be touching the zipper or the flap at all. If you are, double check to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. Make sure that your seams are in the center and that you have not shifted anything. So once you have those marks, you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to sew all 8 of these corners. Starting here, you're going to work your way in towards that mark and you're going to stop. Make sure that you backstitch. So remember, you have this separate and this separate. Same on all the sides. You are not sewing the outside and the lining together. So I'm going to go to the machine using a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to sew in towards all 8 of those marks, making sure that I backstitch. I've gone ahead and I've sewn all 8 of my corners. So my outside and my lining are not sewn together. I have 4 outside corners and 4 lining corners. I used the measurement that was provided in the pattern. I made a mark. I used a few pins when the mark was not on the right side, depending on how I was holding the bag for sewing. And I sewed from the corner into that mark using a 1/4 inch seam and making sure to backstitch. It's important that you sew in right to that mark. If you can't get to it, get as close as you possibly can. But what I find helps is when I'm at my machine, if I just kind of fold the edge that I'm not sewing, sew this side and then kind of tuck that under and roll that other side over, I find that helps to make that a little bit easier. It is a little bit awkward, I know that, but I promise you the results are totally worth it. So now that I have that done, I need to close up the sides here where I have them clipped together. So I'm not going to take the clips out because this time I am going to sew through all the layers. So what I'm going to do at my machine is I'm going to start at this mark right here, sew all the way across to this mark, and it's going to sew together my lining, the end of my flaps, my tab, everything. So this is probably the thickest part of the seam, but honestly, it's really not that bad. It's just the tab in the center that can be a little thick. Again, I'm using my domestic machine and I have not had any issues doing this, even with the canvas and the waterproof canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and close that up, and then it will be time to start boxing these corners. I've sewn the center, so now the only opening that is left in the bag is in the center here for the lining. There should be nothing else left. All of the openings should be closed. So let's take another look before we start doing any corners. My center is sewn together. So you can see I kind of have like an X shape. My corners are separate. My center is sewn together. And what I did is I just sewed from this mark to this mark through all of those layers. Everything lined up because I had sewn to those marks on the other side as well. So I didn't have to go back and do anything special. I did double check on the other side just to make sure, and everything looks good. So now I am ready to move on and cut my corners and box my corners. So in order to do that, I've already gone ahead on this side and started drawing. Again, with a boxy style bag, what you need to make sure you do when you're ready to cut the corners is your measurement needs to be from the fold and from the seam. You have a seam on one side and a fold on the other. So just make sure when you have your ruler that you are measuring from this fold and this seam. So you're going to have an extra 1/4 of an inch when you're making this square, but from here to here, that is a square. So again, just line up your ruler along the fold and along the seam as per the measurement listed in the pattern. I've already gone ahead and done all of the lining sides. Now, in a perfect world, these should line up perfectly, your lining and your outside, and you should be able to cut through both at one time. I am always a little bit overcautious though, and I prefer to do the lining and then do the outside. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to accidentally cut anything wrong. So I just use my scissors. I make all of my marks because if I make a mark and it's wrong, I can fix it. If I cut and it's wrong, there isn't really much I can do. I have not found a way to uncut. We can unsew, but we can't uncut. So I'm just going to trim all of these corners, and you are not trimming through any of your pockets. You're very close to them, but you're not trimming through them. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep trimming, and then I'm going to do the outside as well. All 8 of my corners are all cut. Just a couple of things to note before we go on to the next step. Because you have cut into your seam allowance, if you want to reinforce and add a few extra stitches before you start pulling on this and straightening your corners out, that is absolutely fine. I've got all of my linings done as well. The opening is still here in my lining for turning. So now I am ready to start boxing my corners. I'm going to take these clips out that I had to keep everything flat because now I need to straighten it all out. Another thing that I like to do is reach in through the lining and unzip these flap zippers. On the wrong side. I just find that it makes the bag a little bit more flexible and gives me a little bit more room. So I unzip all the way down to the end. Just like that. So it does not matter what side you start on. It doesn't matter how you do this. It all depends on what you want to do. Sometimes I will get them all clipped and ready at the same time. Sometimes I'll just do half and, kind of go back and do the other half. Whatever you find is easier. What you're going to do with each of these corners is you're basically going to be grabbing the center and pulling it straight. So we're going to take this center, and I'm going to kind of push the outside out of the way. I'm going to grab the center here and the center here and straighten that out. I'm trying to do this so you can see it clearly. And I'm also not tugging so hard that I pull any of those stitches out. I did not do any reinforcing. So I'm just going to add a clip in the center to hold my stitch, and then add a clip for each end. I find that 3 clips is good for me. All right, just like so. And now I'm going to go ahead and do another corner. So I'm on the outside now. If you want to do one corner, sew it, come back and do another, whatever is easier for you. Again, here is the corner, the little part that I cut into, and I'm going to straighten that out. So I just kind of roll everything out of the way. Don't be ginger and really gentle with the bag. You're going to be pulling on it, pushing on it, squishing it. Do whatever it takes to get your corners nice and straight, because the straighter they are, the better it looks in the end. Kind of pull everything apart here. If your corner is not cut perfectly, you can go back in and trim it and fix it up, but I try not to stress too much about it. Sometimes it's just bad measurements or cutting. You know, if I have like a little spot like that, I don't worry too much about it. So let me show you on the other side, just so those aren't getting in the way. We'll take another look. So here is my bag flat. I'm going to grab in the center and straighten out. So I'm grabbing right in the center here and pulling that straight. The corner that you're sewing should be going in the same direction as the lines from your pocket and the lines from your handle. So that's how you'll know that you're doing it correctly. And just kind of roll that out of the way and add your clip. So you're going to take this to the machine and you're going to sew all 8 corners. Again, don't be really gentle with it. You're going to need to squish it. And I find that if I have this corner, if I'm ready to sew this, I want that part on the bed of the machine. So I put it down like this, squish that out of my way, keep it nice and flat, and I sew. So 1/4 inch, keep it as straight as you can and make sure that you backstitch, and then we'll come back and turn it right side out. My corners are all sewn, and this is the current state of my bag. I understand it does not look pretty, but it's going to real soon. So I have all corners sewn. The only thing left is the opening in the bottom of the lining. I double checked to make sure I've gotten all 8 corners stitched. Are they all perfect? No, absolutely not. Are they all sewn and closed? Yes. So I did the best job that I could, and if it wasn't perfect, I made it as perfect as I possibly could. So I'm going to reach in here through the opening in the lining, and I'm going to turn. And it's a little stiff because of the waterproof canvas, but just take my time. I can get it all out. The handles out. Almost. Okay, so before I go any further, I like to just really reach in here and poke those corners out. Make sure that they're nice and crisp. All right, I always do the outside first, and I'm also checking to make sure that there's no holes, that I haven't missed anything, if there's any threads I need to trim, all that good stuff. So keep pushing. I just love this fabric. I loved it when it came in, and now I am kind of obsessed with it. So let's straighten out one last corner. We're good to go. The outside looks perfect, and I'm just going to tuck in these edges. My inside corners look good too. Everything is good. So I'm going to close up the lining, and again, I do this by machine. You don't have to do it by hand unless you want to. Just going to fold those edges under just like that. Add some clips and sew about 1/8 inch right across there. When I'm done, I will give it a final press, and then we'll talk about the last little detail, which is adding something to your double zippered flap to make it open a little bit easier. So I'm all finished, and what a beauty. I am so excited. I cannot wait to put my stuff in this. Like, I want to do it right now. So let's take a look at the inside. I gave it a good press. I closed up the lining, tucked everything in, got all my pockets, put all of my goodies in. I did press it where it needed. And also what I like to do with boxy pouches and bags like this is I like to press along here as well. So I kind of fold that and then put it on my ironing board and then press. I do that on the bottom and the sides. So even though this is not a seam and neither is the bottom, I just find that it gives it a little bit more structure and that nice square look. So I did go ahead and press that. I've got my tabs here on each end to help with opening and closing. But what about both of these zippers? wouldn't it be great if I could just open them at once? Well, I have a solution for that too. So you can use a piece of ribbon, you can use a scrap of cork, you can use anything you like for that. I went and made like a tiny little handle. So this was a 1" by 14" strip, no interfacing. I folded it just like a regular handle at my iron, and then I just stitched down the center. There's no sense in trying to measure in from the edges. This does not need to be perfect. Now, even when you have rectangular zipper pulls, you can still use this, so it doesn't have to be a round or a zipper pull that has an opening. I'm going to just thread this through that part right there, or you can go in through that part, the pull itself, or the zipper part. I don't really know my terminology. So I'm just going to kind of squeeze this in like that. Pair of tweezers would be really helpful right now. So I'll pull that through and pull that through on the other side. Actually, I'm just going to use my scissors here and kind of poke that in. There we go. And once I have that through, I'm just going to tie a knot. I didn't finish the ends, so eventually they're probably going to fray, and I don't mind. If you want to add a little bit of fray check or glue to the ends, you can. And I think eventually if this wears out and it looks really bad, I'll just replace it. It's just a little scrap of fabric, so it didn't really take too much. I'm not really concerned. I just want this to be a little kind of zipper handle. Trim the ends here. That one's good. And now I can open and close my zipper a lot more easily. It's a little bit more difficult right now because there's nothing in the bag, so that definitely makes a difference. There's nothing holding it down, but I have my little handle and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to pack as much stuff in here as I can and see how much this bag holds. So hang in there. I filled my bag with all of my necessities, everything I would need for a sewing weekend. So I put my pliers, I always have needle nose pliers with me just in case, you never know. Scissors, I've got marking tools, I've got my seam ripper, some more scissors, rotary cutter blades, sewing needles, always important. Inside, I have my clips. No, I would not normally travel with these in a bowl, but I wasn't really prepared today. I've got a small ruler, some rotary cutters, my fabric fusion. I've got my big scissors, my bag of thread. I have a ruler. I have my punch. some tape, my pressing clappers, my 4-in-1 tool, more marking tools, and more glue. So I would say this is a success. I am packed and ready to go, and I can't wait to take this to my next sewing retreat. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the little notification bell. That way you'll know when new videos come out. I upload to the channel every Friday from our Facebook Live, and I upload videos like this as often as I can. Just remember, Facebook is for fun, tutorials are for learning, and I hope you learned a lot today. Thank you for joining me.